Hey guys, it's the Conic, and I'd like to introduce you to the build I have been working on the past week, the Titan Skeletal Brute Summoner. Before we go over why Titan is the ascendancy of choice, we have to talk a bit about the core interactions of the setup and what makes it perform so effectively. Skeletal Brutes are tanky melee minions with a higher than average spirit cost and seemingly no noteworthy characteristics. That is, until you take a look at their data mine ability page and realize these minions use Bonshatter on a 4-second cooldown. Bonshatter being a skill that instantly heavy stuns enemies that are primed for stun, emitting a shockwave of the same magnitude, which effectively means if an enemy is above a certain percentage of their stun bar, the skill will stun them and AoE others. This percent varies between mobs based off of rarity, with normals requiring 40% and I think uniques requiring 80%. If you're enjoying the video, do consider liking and subscribing, as not only does it help out with the algorithm, but we are also less than 100 subs till we get monetized. And also, we have a face reveal on YouTube and stream if we get to 2,000 subs before the end of 2025. So if any of that interests you, be sure to hit that sub button. What is even more impressive is going in, I thought the brutes would be trying to use Bonshatter off cooldown, as that is typically how minions from PoE 1 would behave. This turned out to not be the case, as they actually hold off on using the ability until the enemy they are targeting is actually primed for stun. This means their Bonshatter is always ready when clearing, and you have way less awkward pauses with no AoE than I originally anticipated. To make this interaction even more effective, we are going to be running Overwhelming Presence. This is an aura that reduces the stun thresholds of enemies in your presence. This makes them even easier to get primed for stun for that sweet AoE explosion that we are going for, making for a significantly smoother clear experience. With all that explained, we can talk about why Titan, as it is the question I get asked the most while on stream, and rightfully so. The main reason for Titan is because of the ascendancy node Hawking Form, for its 50% increased effect of small nodes. This is a big avenue for scaling aura effect and presence AoE on the tree, which really helps juice overwhelming presence. We also have access to the most amount of minion AoE on the tree, which helps a lot for chain exploding in monster pack, which we're going to cover a bit later on. With the core of the build covered, let's hop right into POB and start explaining how the build works, starting with the skill tree. Now with the skill tree, we are going to be doing a lot of traveling because we do need to get to the minion side of the tree so we can pick up minion damage nodes, minion revive, minion AoE. But like I said, we are still going to be picking up nodes that are important for scaling overwhelming presence. So nodes like increased magnitude and quality of life nodes like presence area of effect, because that means you can be further away from the enemy while still keeping them in your area of effect. So this is the aura wheel, this is another aura wheel, which is also very important. And then this is just presence AoE with slightly more spirits than other classes to get access to. This is also a very important wheel, as other than this, we actually don't get that much access to percent increased minion damage. I think right now we're sitting at about 400%, give or take, 424. This gives us by itself like 100%, so don't sleep on that one. And then we're scaling ES stun, minion defenses for res, and this wheel is actually very important, and it's something you want to pick up as soon as you can, and that is minion accuracy rating. Now I may be misremembering, but I seem to remember them saying melee skills should not require accuracy, as it didn't make sense that you would throw a melee attack and it would miss. That doesn't seem to be the case for melee minions, as they still very much miss when you run evasive modifiers and they still use accuracy. So this is a very important node when you're switching to your brutes, because without this, you are going to have your slower hitting brutes just miss, and that just feels really bad. But the accuracy is very important, attack cast speed, revive speed, all that good stuff. For items, we are going to be going over the stat priority in a bit. More or less, it's very straightforward. It's kind of like other minion builds. Scepter, you really want to juice your level for minion skills, as that gives them a decent amount of flat damage, more defenses, stuff like that. And then as a close second, you want to scale more increased damage. Like I said before, we do not get that much access to increased damage, so getting this on the scepter is really big. And then Spirit is probably the third priority, followed by attack speed and then Fizz. For the Prism Guardian, you do not need to get this at the start if you're on more of a budget. This is a very nice to have, but it's not mandatory. It allows you to get at least +1 Spirit if you're +1 Brute rather, if you're at the 2000 life range, and if you have more, you get more spirits to then gain more summons, basically minions. And then for the Tiara, we're just looking for as much ES as we can beside life, and you'd very quickly notice in everything here the priority would be either spirits, level, or life, and then ES or resistances or anything we need. In the chest pieces case, we're looking for a spirit on a Cont'd mantle base. The reason we go for Cont'd mantle is there's two reasons to it. There's a obvious spirit implicit, but there's also the fact that we get some extra armor from our ascendancy, from the equipped body armor. So just being able to get some armor just feels like it's not wasted. At least there's no better other note to get, in case you're wondering. So here, like I said, spirits, suffixes, life is a priority, and then gloves, life, suffix, ES. Boots, movement speed, life, ES, suffixes, and then amulets, levels actually priority here. Spirits, life. You really want to get as much spirit as you can, just because of how big the spirit cost of brutes are. Rings, basically just life and suffixes, and then belt, life and suffixes, all the same. For charms, we are going to be going for freeze charms, stun charms, and if you have a third charm slot, you want to get an anti-bleed charm, if I remember correctly. Just because bleeds have a tendency to be on the more dangerous side, especially seen as they go through ES. And then for jewels, you want to get a Prism of Belief. As many levels as you can with brutes is fine. And for your sapphire, your priority would be attack cast speed, then ES, and then Chaos Res is a nice add-on on top of everything. Earlier, I mentioned how you could chain explode a pack with a single Bonshatter. The key to that is the Impact Shockwave support gem. This support gem repeats the damage of the stunning hit in a smaller AoE around the stun target. And while the AoE is not the most impressive, in my testing, it feels like it actually acts like an extension of Bonshatter, which would stun prime for stun enemies and trigger other Bonshatter AoE and another Impact Shockwave proc, which all cause stun buildups and other procs, essentially creating a chain Bonshatter explosion when it procs inside a pack. On single target, however, this becomes a dead link. And on that note, if any of my showcases you saw the text saying the fight was without swapping, it typically meant it just had Impact Shockwave and sometimes Overpower support in, which I was testing for a bit. And if you're wondering what Overpower support does, it just grants more stun buildup. The Impact Shockwave support gem also has a secondary use as a consolation prize for enemies you one-shot without actually getting a Bonshatter proc, as typically it would be a stunning hit in that case and still have an AoE, albeit a smaller one, which could still prime others for stuns, which could then be followed up with a Bonshatter by your minions. Now for the actual other gems we're using in the build, we are going to be using Muster. Muster is a gem that gives more damage for each different persistent minion, and then for the persistent minions we are using Clerics for healing, Snipers for armor shred, Reavers for some secondary armor shred, just so we don't always have to use the Sniper's abilities. And then we're using Spectres, and for the Spectres we are using a 10 spirit Spectre called Terracotta Warrior, which we do still have spirit for. It can be found in the Keth region in the first underground city portion of that map. And then we're obviously using the Skeletal Warriors from our Scepter. Then we are also supporting brutes with Heavy Swing, Feeding Frenzy, Brutality. The idea here is we are trying to get the initial hit as big as possible, not necessarily as fast as possible. This builds up as much stun as possible and then allows them to follow up with a Bonshatter. Now, alternatively, you could try Overpower, but do note with Overpower, when you get to a certain level of investment, it might just make your initial hit a stunning hit, which is what you're trying to avoid. And then Martial Tempo is a potential swap for Impact Shockwave on single targets should you need to. Moving on to the Clerics, we are supporting them with Arcane Tempo for cast speed, Last Gas to make sure they always last 4 seconds after being killed, and Meat Shield to reduce the amount of damage they take. Now for snipers, like I said, they're going to be our armor shredders primarily. We're going to be pairing them with corrosion, which makes their active break armor equal to 80% of that damage. We're using bidding, so it actually has more damage. Then we're using commandment, so we can use that ability more frequently, which allows us to only run one. And then comorbidity, which allows them to have 2 poisons, almost doubling or basically doubling the armor shred potential. And then for Reavers, we're going to be pairing our Reavers with Splinter and Demolisher. This makes it so their melee damage actually shreds armor, and this kind of scales that. Reavers are here as a secondary, and honestly, they are more so just as fodder for muster, but they do still have a use. Spectre, you don't need to support them with anything. They're literally just there to die. Like they just exist for muster. Then for the warriors, we actually want to support them with Sacrificial Lamb, which makes it so offerings always prioritize them. We want to prioritize Sacrificial Lamb, Death March, Calling Strike, Blind. Sacrificial Lamb is not on PoE, hence why we just do not have it here, but that is going to be your priority support gem here. Overwhelming Presence has nothing. Convalescence, we are using this in situations that get dicey to force our ES recharge to start. It is going to be on our weapon swap, so we do not actually need to reserve spirit for it. And in testing, it looks like currently this is bugged to where you do not actually swap weapons when you press it. So it's very convenient and actually has no downsides to use. So you just keep a weapon on your weapon swap and have Convalescence then. You support that with Persistence, so the buff lasts longer, and Ingenuity, so it has less cooldown. Then lastly, our Pain Offering. This is actually a very big damage multi, as it gives our minions attack and cast speed as well as increased damage. But not only that, it has a much smaller AoE in which it provides Rage, which is a buff, or it's a buff that gives your minions more attack damage the more of it they have, and that makes them degen it if they haven't gained it in some time. So it's very good for a single target environment if you're able to get the Pain Offering right on the boss, because then everybody around it is getting Rage. Ablation to increase the effect of the Pain Offering. Then we have Magnified Effect for AoE and Expanse for AoE. This makes it so they really have a hard time walking out of the range of Pain Offering, but even more so, it expands the range of which you're getting Rage from Font of Rage, which allows you to more easily affect your minions. Now for a very quick pros and cons section, so you kind of have an idea for the good sides and the downsides of this build. Skeletal Brutes have really good clear speed, being able to explode entire packs with Bonshatter. They have really good single target, especially when you start ramping up in investment and you're getting more and more spirits, and you're able to squeeze in more and more brutes, because each brute extra is a lot more damage than when you had one less. They are also able to instantly stun bosses at the start of the fight, and on higher investments they're able to kill the bosses within that stun window, making it a very, very comfortable boss overall. Then a very big plus is also having that thick wall of shields just protecting from projectiles, because they have really generous hitboxes, and even strong boxes that have like those chaos projectiles, I've never had to sweat them because my brutes are always eating, face tanking everything. Now there's also a very big positive that happened to me on stream. I'll try to find it and put it up on screen, but sometimes they're able to stop bosses from just straight up doing mechanics that involve moving towards you or hitting you and stuff like that. It's a very, very comfortable place now. It's a very good boss, and it's also a very good map clear. Then for the cons, the biggest one is that tight maps are not the best, especially on a budget when each of your brute is not quite doing that much damage. Now this gets a lot better when you invest, because then even though you only have access to like 1 or 2 brutes that can hit the enemy in front of that chokehold, that is typically enough to blow up the pack and you move on. But on a tighter budget, maybe you still have to like, it can feel rough essentially. And you can theoretically suffer from success with this build on the ultra high-end budgets if you have enough damage to one-shot a mob without actually using Bonshatter, like we mentioned in the earlier section. That would hurt your clear speed. It is also preventable with using a gem swap, but that would be intentionally reducing your single target damage, so you had more stun build up in the form of like overpower, being the gems you swap in. You also cannot run map mods using certain modifiers like increased stun threshold or evasive. These two just feel very rough. Increased stun threshold means they will die before they get primed for stun to then get that AoE. So you'd essentially just be playing without AoE, which feels very rough. And then evasive, like I said, they do require evasion, or rather accuracy, to hit enemies. So evasive maps are kind of sketch. You can, however, fix this with a gem swap, I guess. I think it's Pinpoint, I forget the name. But you have that option that's available to you, but it just feels bad to have to swap for a map modifier. Overall, the build blew my expectations out of the water, and while it cannot be compared to meta builds like Lightning Spear, but let's be real, nothing can compare to Lightning Spear. But as far as minion builds are concerned, they are actually competitive in clear speed and single target damage to Storm Mages, so that was really good. If you made it this far, do consider liking and subscribing, as we are less than 30 subs away from 1,000. And with all that said, thank you for watching.